How are you today? Are you asleep? Awake? Most of you, surprisingly, look bright-eyed and bushy-tailed on this chilly afternoon. And a hearty welcome to each and every one of you, as also to our viewers on the IIIT Delhi YouTube channel. Even if you are not with us in the flesh, you are certainly with us in spirit. And to my many, many Facebook followers and Facebook followers of the Lunchbox Philosophers, a special welcome from Ayyar. Welcome, Duru. Yeah, I'm glad you could make it, and Samresh, and so many of my colleagues. To all my colleagues, students, ex-students, shopping tourists, former TAs like Chakit, who dropped in out of animal curiosity. Right, welcome. We have with us a very special guest, and before we get to him, I would like to introduce his partner and traveling companion, Eva. Eva, would you stand up and be recognized? Let's have a big hand for Eva. She and Paul are much better adjusted to India than I am. I'm supposed to be of Indian origin, but you wouldn't guess it. I'm much more fussy about the many liabilities of India and its climate, its things happening, the political climate, and they're very adaptable, and they have been to India at least 10 times and enjoyed so much that they plan to return every year. So we might see more of them in the future. At least I hope so. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Paul Schweizer. Dr. Schweizer is a senior lecturer in the School of Informatics at the University of Edinburgh. He is a member of the Institute for Language, Cognition and Computation there. His specialties include philosophical logic, the computational paradigm, and philosophy of mind. When I first started reading and researching his papers, I was forcefully struck with the image of the two Pauls, as I call it. The first Paul is a rather strong advocate of the computational theory of mind, CTM, and it has some family resemblances with strong AI, which many of us are familiar with, and many of us have discussed in lunchbox sessions and classes. But the other Paul is the Paul who is very interested in Indian philosophy. He knows Sanskrit, and he's delved deep into Advaita Vedanta and Sankhya. And this Paul talks about consciousness. This Paul talks about the freedom of consciousness and unlimited consciousness. So, at first I was puzzled, and then as I was reading this paper on Vedanta and Sankhya, toward the end he inserts this mischievous little line, which goes, but in the Sankhya, the mind can be replicated mechanically, zombie-like. And he's promised to send me a copy of his zombie theory of mind according to Sankhya. I can't wait to read it. And I think that's the connector. Paul, when he talks about the computational theory of mind, as you can ask him about this, he is not addressing consciousness in a Vedantic or Sankhya sense at all. He's really talking about mind or consciousness in a Western Cartesian sense, also a sense implied in the writings of early phenomenologists like Brentano, and their view of intentionality. So certain other views are not included at all. And he certainly does not mean to imply that the computational theory applies to consciousness in the Vedantic sense, far from it. But he does think a computational account is sufficient to explain syntactically and to explain completely the workings of what we call the mind. We do not need a representational component. We don't need any other. So let's join me in giving him a warm round of applause. Let's welcome Paul Schweizer. Thank you for being with us, Paul.
Well, thank you very much for that fantastic introduction and for inviting me here to speak today and for the wonderful turnout of people in the audience. I've shaved this down from a much longer paper and presentation, so I hope that what I've got here is mildly coherent in the form I have it. Computational theory of mind without representational content is the basic topic. See if I can get this. Right, so the computational theory of mind, just as a very skeletal synopsis, holds that computation is a theoretical key to explaining mentality. So according to the computational theory of mind, cognitive processes are essentially computational processes. They're a form of computation, and that's an explanation of how intelligence and mentality arise in the natural world when a given configuration of mass energy implements the right type of computational formalism. That is the explanation in naturalistic terms, according to the computational theory of mind. So in this approach, computation isn't just a modeling technique or an engineering technique, because you can use computation to model economies or meteorology or behavior of materials under various stresses and things like that. That's modeling. On this view, that's not what's happening with mentality and intelligence. This is actually scientific theory, not an engineering technique. So mental states are supposed to be literally understood and explained as internal computational processes. They're not just being modeled, they actually in fact are computational processes. So that invites the question, well, what is computation then? And I think that's something that needs to be addressed before anything else can be entertained. So the mathematical theory of computation says that computation is basically understood in terms of effective procedures or mechanical procedures, which is simply a finite set of instructions for manipulating syntax, rules for manipulating syntax. They can be followed by a machine or by a human being with very limited capabilities. Only elementary operations can suffice for manipulating symbols. And a definitional constraint on an effective procedure is that the rules can be followed without understanding or additional interpretation. You don't have to know what the symbols mean in order to follow the rules. That's if you need additional understanding, it's not an effective procedure. So there are a number of, that's a very intuitive idea, right? That's extremely general, an effective procedure. There are different possible frameworks put forward to how you might make this basic idea fleshed out and specific. Turing's very famous automatic computing machines, or Turing machines, 1936. They're a very intuitive and elegant rendition of the notion of an effective procedure, but there are many alternatives. There's a huge variety. Church's Lambda calculus, Gödel's recursive function theory, Lambda's abacus machine, are all formalizations of the same idea. They look very different on the surface. As formalisms, they often don't look remotely similar. But according to the Church-Turing thesis, the notion of computability is actually captured in an absolute sense by Turing machine computability, because everything that can be, in principle, computed by any device can be computed by a universal Turing machine. So yeah, it's a very powerful mathematical idea, and the underlying commonality in these frameworks is simply that the rules are finitary and can be followed without any interpretation or understanding. That's what's in common between all these coextensively powerful frameworks. So the thing to note here in this context is that semantical content plays no role whatever. So here's a simple example. Computation is pure syntax manipulation. The interpretation is a different level of analysis, which isn't intrinsic to computation. So here's a simple example of a computation, a four-state Turing machine. That's its program. For a Turing machine quadruples, this just means, there's a pointer, but if it's in state Q1, reading a 1, it prints a blank and stays in state Q1. Q1, reading a blank, moves right one square, and to state Q2. So these are conditional instructions, basically. If in this state, reading the symbol, perform this action, go to this state. That's a classic way of giving a Turing machine program. So that's the Turing machine. Here's the computation. Here's the program again. Suppose it gets this input, It starts on this input, the leftmost one in state 1. So this is the state, this is the currently scanned square, zeros to the left and right after this. So now it's just following the instructions as above. So it's just a mechanical deterministic process. These are all in obedience with the instructions given on the top there. It halts. It halts when it enters an input and a state for which it has no instruction. That's the common idea. So it's in state Q4 reading a 1, it has no instruction, so it halts. So that's a little coy computation. That's a simple example. It's a perfectly good Turing machine computation, but what does it mean? Well, it doesn't matter, right? We just follow the rules, got from the starting point to the halting state. If you wanted to, you could give this an interpretation. I don't know if it leaped out at you what a natural interpretation might be for that little computation. Well, you could choose it as interpreting addition on the positive integers expressed in monadic notation. That would be a natural interpretation if you look at this thing. This could be 2 and 3 is the 2 inputs, and it computes 5 is the output in monadic notation. So you could put that interpretation on it if you wanted to, but it doesn't make any difference. It does what it does independently. So the computational paradigm, or the computational theory of mind, the pure computational theory of mind, it has a number of theoretical attractions because it can supply solutions to a number of central problems affecting a naturalistic explanation of the mind. For example, the mind-body problem. What is the relationship between mind and body? Well, that's been vexing philosophers for a long time. Here's a clear answer. It might not be the right answer, but it's a clear and compelling answer, the mind-program analogy. The mind is to the brain as a program is to the hardware of a digital computer. Now that kind of relationship doesn't seem at all mysterious, right? That's something that we take for granted every day, but it's potentially elucidating explanation of the relationship between mind and body. And this mind-program analogy also then gives a way of addressing another long-standing problem, which is mental causation. If I have the thought, the mental event that I want to raise my left hand, that's a mental event. If my left hand goes up, that's a physical event. How can a physical event be caused by something non-physical without violating physical conservation laws? If you think the universe is causally closed, then you've got a problem, right? If a non-physical event is causing physical behavior. Well, that's a big problem theoretically, but the mind-program analogy handles it quite effortlessly, right? It just has to be an implemented computational process leading to an action. No physical conservation laws are violated, and you don't need strange pre-established harmonies and Leibniz. There's the mental realm, the physical realm, they just happen to evolve in parallel as if one causes the other when they're in fact independent. Right, so that's one key virtue. Those two problems are given very nice, elegant solutions. Another thing is the elimination of semantics. The semantical homunculus can now be fully discharged because the rules which define a computation don't require understanding or interpretation. So that's a way of providing a fully naturalistic account. There's no mysterious intention or semantical residue required on this picture. And that's potentially a scientific virtue, right, because that's naturalistic. So that's, also, computational theory of mind fits perfectly with the traditional idea of methodological solipsism. Because formal calculi can be manipulated without appeal to interpretation, they're internally self-sufficient. They don't depend on the external world of their intended meaning. So that fits in perfectly well with the Cartesian view of narrow or solipsistic mental states. Yeah, so I'm not sure what's my time frame at the moment.
15 to another 5-10 minutes.
5 minutes,
And then
okay.
we'll throw it open for questions. We'll chat a little and then we'll throw it open.
Right, okay. Yeah, so syntax and semantics, they have an intrinsically one-to-many relationship. The same formal system can be given many different interpretations. And that's a standard feature in, say, logic and model theory, right? You could have an axiomatic system which you intend to be about the natural numbers, say, that's your intended interpretation. But then there's other models which are non-standard models, non-intended models, and you can't block them. They're, from the point of view of the syntax, they're equally good. So that's one-to-many. And that's like narrow psychological states which are compatible with a limitless variety of distal sources of input, right? If it hits the input interface and the system can't distinguish what its external cause was, that stimuli will not be distinguishable from a different cause of the same kind of stimuli, right? So, like virtual reality, for example, versus real vision. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Putnam's twin Earth argument, but this is again, it fits into that if you have different external things in the environment which look like water, on Earth it's H2O, on twin Earth it's a different molecular structure. Well, if you can't tell the difference visually, then you're going to be the same perceptual state, even though the external stimulus is in fact chemically distinct. In any case, here's a summary of some of the theoretical strengths of the computational theory of mind. Mind-body problem, mind and brain, relationship, a nice clear model, mental causation as well, that's not a problem any longer. We get rid of the intentional homunculus. You don't have to have some kind of kernel of understanding or semantics because the rules don't require it. So it's a naturalistic explanation. And in terms of methodological solipsism, it preserves standard input-output boundaries we're accustomed to, all without the idea of cognitive content. So that's a little summary of the virtues of pure computation. Now, the traditional conception of mind, it holds that content is perhaps the most important feature distinguishing mental from non-mental systems. And that's in the tradition of Brentano and later thinkers, that the essential features aboutness, content, intentionality, representation, that's what makes a system mental, as opposed to, say, this table, which is not mental. We have states which are about external objects. This table doesn't have intentional states. And Searle adopts this view, right, in his famous Chinese room argument, critiques of strong AI, because he says intentionality is a feature which is essential, and the Chinese room doesn't have intentionality, hence instantiating a program isn't a sufficient condition. So that's at the heart of the Chinese room argument. But that basic idea is also built into orthodox cognitive science, if people take on board the idea of mental representations as being a primary theoretical device, as in Fodor, right, in the classic case of this. Representation is the level at which you're actually describing a cognitive system. That's an essential criteria. So, according to Fodor, there are many levels of explanation and description in the natural world, from quarks all the way to quasars, a huge continuity of levels, and he says that it's only at the representational level that you're actually at the cognitive level of description. Representation distinguishes the cognitive. So what people do then in orthodox cognitive science, the sort of received view in philosophy and cognitive science, is you take the representational theory of mind, which derives from Brentano and is accepted by Fodor and others, where semantic content is essential, and you paste this together with the computational theory of mind, the pure computational view. Because computational theory of mind syntax can be interpreted, it's in fact multiply interpretable, but these representational theory of mind advocates, then they would say, well, it's actually the vehicle of this special, unique interpretation which distinguishes minds. So this yields a theoretical mutation. If you put representational theory of mind together with computational theory of mind, you get the orthodox view at the current time, which is a computational representational theory of mind. So in this kind of view, cognitive agents are seen as semantic engines, automatic formal systems, replete with a unique and privileged interpretation. So the locution that's often used is that the syntax becomes the vehicle for the content, but the content is the traditional home or the mental. So the syntax is the vehicle, but the content there is really the important thing. I'd say that the first thing to note is that this whole idea of a semantic engine is misguided because only the syntax is mechanized in these computational systems, while the assigned content is in fact totally inert. It doesn't do anything. Since computation is essentially uninterpreted syntax, this means that the purported content of representations doesn't do any work. It has no role to play in the cognitive processes. So in accord with both methodological solipsism and the definition of effective procedure, the intended interpretation of these internal syntactical manipulations makes no difference, right? It doesn't do any work or play any role, whatever. So I think it's in this case time for the application of Occam's razor. Why bring back the semantical homunculus, the intentional homunculus, when it's not doing any work and basically just complicating the picture, bringing in a mysterious, non-naturalistic kind of residue. So I think as a diagnosis of what's happening here is that the postulation of content as the essential feature distinguishing minds from non-minds is a sort of last remaining vestige of Cartesian dualism. That's my diagnosis of what's driving people to posit this. And I think that a computational theory of mind really doesn't have any need for a semantical ghost in the machine in a sort of, neo-Cartesian spin on semantics. So when it comes to computation and content, all you really need is the vehicle, the syntax, and not the excess baggage.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Let's have a big hand for Paul. And for those of you joining in on YouTube, please feel free to leave your comments on the show. We would love to hear from you, and we'll certainly respond whenever we can, provided the comments are within a certain finite domain. I don't see myself sacrificing a full-time position to answer comments all day and all night. I spend way too much time on the social media anyway. Paul, if you would come back here, let's chat briefly. There are a couple of things that I want to do. Now let's sit together, a cozy fireside chat, and then we'll invite these folks to join us. But I just want to set the ball rolling. I think I agree with you on a number of points. I think the computational theory of mind certainly flushes out the last remnants of the ghost in the machine, or any form of saying that there is a cognito, a thinking consciousness, a content-ridden thinking consciousness inside the brain. I think the computational theory too has the advantage that if you have a mastery of the syntax, and if you view the mind as the program and the brain as hardware, then you certainly can explain most of the so-called alleged mental phenomena. Yes, definitely. Where is your...
I have one.
Oh, you have a collar mic. Okay. Very good. So I do agree with you up to that point, but I also think there are two or three things that came to my mind. I thought I'd just jot them down. One is a quote from Wittgenstein that is not recognized by his ordinary language devotees. It's a comment about robotics, actually. He says to see the living human being, seeing a living human being as an automaton is analogous to seeing one figure as a limiting case or variant of another. And then he goes on to introduce a fascinating metaphor. He says is it not like seeing cross sections of a window? And he's talking about German windows here, which had those little cross sections, as a swastika. And remember, this is in the context of World War II. He's a very tormented Jewish Austrian philosopher who's hiding out in Cambridge, hates Cambridge elitism, and he makes the statement, I was also thinking about air raids and how people would board up their windows during World War II with pieces of paper and all of that. So it's quite possible to see a kind of a swastika gestalt in the arrangement of a paper on a window to safeguard against air raids. So, but the idea of seeing, what I think he means is that you can frame the human being as an automaton, you can frame the human mind as robotic, but that's just seeing a cross-section and reading a certain kind of gestalt into it. I'm not sure that you can read a full-fledged Searlean theory of projection, that, you know, the CTM advocate is simply projecting their own needs and interests onto the mind and reading their own orientation into the mind. I think there's a little more to it than that. I think the quote from Wittgenstein is a lot more open-ended. You can read it in a variety of ways. First, what do you think of that?
Well, actually, I don't, in fact, advocate the computational theory of mind to quite the degree that I think you suggest, because my main goal is more of a conditional statement that if one does accept this approach to the mind, and it does have a number of virtues, then there is no room for content. But so the orthodox view does accept both, which I think is a very unstable and strange picture. But I'm a bit agnostic, actually, about the capabilities in principle of the computational theory to account for all mental phenomena. So I'm not, in fact, advocating it as the correct view, but rather in terms of looking at and analyzing what is now the orthodox view, that is an unstable combination of factors. So I think the computational approach has many strengths and is a good direction theoretically to proceed in, but I would reserve the opinion that it was in fact would be ultimately successful. There could well be things which can't be accounted for in that way, because some aspects of human mentality may be more biochemically reduced and more easily understood and explained, not in a formal abstract computational framework, but in terms of other physical mechanisms, say, which aren't really, you don't shed any good light on them by looking at them formally.
That's true. But what I do like, though, is your insight that as a formal syntactic system, CTM, or the computational theory of mind, works quite well to see the mind as nothing more than a computational machine. And that it works quite well without bringing in representational content, without bringing in the ghost of the machine. The idea that there's a thinking consciousness somehow embedded in this lump of matter called the body and inside the brain. There is no such jack in the box. If I performed brain surgery on you, I wouldn't find a little jack in the box that goes, I'm Vrinda's consciousness. But to go back to your other paper on Vedanta and Sankhya and how this all ties in together, because as I said at the start, in the introductory remarks on this YouTube video, that there really are two Pauls. There is the Paul who, let's say, waves a flag for the completeness of a computational theory of mind.
I don't wave that flag, actually. That's what I'm saying. I'd say it's a good paradigm, and it's interesting and powerful. It has.
You do see it as a sound paradigm.
I'm an agnostic.
Yeah.
I'm agnostic.
But
so I'm not committed to it. I find it interesting, but it's premature to say that it was ultimately successful because it hasn't actually proved itself.
And it's complete without bringing in representation.
Without representation, without some, yes, I think if it does, if it's successful or not, it doesn't need semantics. So if you do need semantics, you're going to have to abandon computational theory of mind. So I think you can't have both. So if you do have to have the old school belief with Brentano and Descartes and Searle that intentionality of some sort of noetic ray is really the essential aspect of the mind,
right?
That's going to transcend computational resources, and it probably will transcend physical ones as well, the naturalistic ones. So I wouldn't say that's definitely wrong, but it's not a naturalistic or a scientific orientation.
Okay. But anyway, so at some level you do believe that it is a plausible sound without bringing in representation, without bringing in the ghost of the machine,
yes.
Without semantics. But the second Paul is a Paul who is very interested in mysticism, and interested in consciousness in a non-mental sense. Consciousness in the way in which Advaita Vedanta just defines it, for example, absolute consciousness. Consciousness without condition. Or even the way in which Sankhya defines consciousness. I mean, Purusha is rather different than Manas. And you point out that Manas is actually quite mechanical. And Manas, mind, can be replicated mechanically in Sankhya. You could have a Sankhya zombie. You could have a robot, a kind of maybe a Frankenstein's monster of sorts, created by a mad computer scientist that fulfills the conditions, the necessary conditions of being a mind, a manas. Prakriti is different, and buddhi is different. As I read you, buddhi is sort of like the mediation, the mediating term between the inert, sleeping Purusha and buddhi, and manas. Yeah, and the most brilliant insight in that paper is that in Sankhya there is no mind-body duality a la Descartes. There is no Cartesian duality of body and mind. Rather, it is an integrated self. It is an integrated body-mind. The real duality is between consciousness as Purusha, which is spiritual, unlimited, vast, etc., and manas, which is quite mechanical.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that form of dualism then avoids one of the basic problems with Cartesian dualism, which is interaction of mind and physical substance, right? Because that's a huge problem in Descartes. How can the mind affect physical, extended substance? Well, it shouldn't be able to. How can physical extended substance affect the mind as in perception? How could light rays hitting your retina, that's a mechanical physical process, translated to subjective conscious experience to a mind? There's a ontological gap there which doesn't seem to have a theoretical bridge. Whereas on the Sankhya view, mind and body are both on the material side, so there's no problem with causation, mental causation, or perceptual impacts on the mental states from the external world.
So they are part of an integrated whole,
Yeah,
so to speak.
part of the same cosmically closed system. Mind and body are the same.
Mind and
cosmically
body.
closed system.
Yeah. I also suggested to you in a recent informal conversation that there are other approaches. For example, we talked about the phenomenologist Merleau-Ponty. So we move out of Brentano and Husserl and their lingering Cartesian legacy, the ghost of Descartes stalking them, and you get into phenomenologists like the French Merleau-Ponty. Merleau-Ponty says that this is a lived body. There's no body and soul. There's no consciousness and matter. This is a lived body, and he uses the very sexual word, motility, sperm motility. So intention, according to him, is really a form of physical eros, physical grasping, just like the sperm swims toward the egg, so also we are forever grasping, thrusting, moving, hugging, making love, falling out of love, going to work. So there's a series of intentionalities, but these intentionalities are very physical. They're sensory motor intentionalities. So there's no dichotomy there at all. There isn't even a residue, and certainly no banshee shriek surrounding. No residue of the ghost in the machine. Surprise, surprise. This approach also exercises the ghost. But this approach is certainly an argument against the computational theory of mind, because we're talking about a lived intentional body, not a mechanically programmed brain biocomputer. Yeah. So, but you see that it's an interesting theory, but still somewhat speculative.
Well, yes, I think it does. You touch on things which potentially are beyond the realms of the computational theory of mind and mechanical formalistic approaches. So, in that respect, it could be pointing out some boundaries of that approach. But then the problem is, how do you make that theoretically explicit and precise? I mean, it's a nice insight and a nice intuition.
And operationally precise.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you could build a device state which incorporated those characteristics.
So you use that old pragmatist cliche, to where it has cache value, operational cache value.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. So, and just making it explicit, fully
Right.
explicit how it actually works.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That is true. I do think though that there is some sort of family resemblance between Merleau-Ponty's lived body with its spermatic intensity toward the world around, and what you spoke about in your paper on Sankhya and Vedanta, underscoring the Sanskrit word tejas. And you talk about tejas as sort of like this electric current that flows out of you toward the other. You know, it's very similar, I think, at least in principle, to what Merleau-Ponty seems to mean by, except his is a much more physical, sexual, genitally located analogy. But the idea of tejas as an electric physical current that flows toward the outside world and toward others. There's no outside world, I'm part of the outside world. But that is how I define myself as a locus of intentionality, not by sitting there and thinking, a la Descartes. There's no thinking subject. I live it. I live that intensity and project outward electrical embrace, electrical contact, electrical energy thrust toward the other. That's how I conduct the commerce of everyday life, how I teach, how I work, how I make love, how I live. What do you think of that? So do you see that the tejas account?
I think it is actually in many ways intuitively parallel with Brentano, and that's the directedness of the mind, because the directedness does require some sort of outward force, and that's why it's naturalistically problematic, because so far no such energy has
Well, nor has Merleau-Ponty's interesting extended concept of motility been verified in any scientific sense.
Yes, Putnam actually makes note of that in one of his writings, that the traditional idea of meaning, because like Searle's intrinsic intentionality, which he says is the foundation of semantics, does require, he calls it a noetic ray, which is not dissimilar to data.
Right.
It's a noetic ray that goes out of your head and points to things that you're thinking about. But so far, no such, all the energy we know about goes into the system, and those kinds of energies don't go out.
Yeah. Any questions from the audience? We would love to hear from you, as also from those who are watching this on YouTube. But for those who are here live in this here and now on Thursday, January 12th, at this IIIT Delhi seminar, Institute seminar, any questions? Rinda, you look perplexed. Could you come up? Can someone get a mic to her? Where's Rajan? Yeah. Okay, good.
I just had a little doubt. This is something that I was thinking of, because when do you stop? Like where do you draw the line between mental and physical? Because as I see it, mental would be something like something that we can't perceive or we haven't understood properly. So we name it as something that it's invisible and I don't understand it. So it's the consciousness, or it's soul, or it's the lightning in the sky that is like that's superstition for me. So how do you draw that line between the mental and between what I understand and what I don't understand, rather than just the mental and physical? As in, is that true that the mental is just something that I don't really understand, and so I just name it in a way that that just sort of makes sense to me, and I don't know this, so I will just call it consciousness, or just
well, I think consciousness is a difficult one, certainly, but for a lot of people in cognitive science, they're more concerned with propositional attitude states, like beliefs and desires, and those cause rational actions. So that kind of framework, belief, desire, explanation, rational agenthood, is propositional attitude states, which they want to try to explain as mental states. And consciousness is sort of put to the side just because it's hard enough to understand propositional attitudes, and you add consciousness, certainly makes it harder. But so just minds in terms of mental states like beliefs, say, beliefs and desires. I think it's one of the virtues of the computational paradigm that you don't have to have a dividing line between the mental and the physical, because the mental is a level of description of the physical. So just like a program, this is running, Windows 10 or whatever, that's a level of description of an electromechanical device, which is in fact just going according to natural law. So when you say it's running this abstract program, well, it's still a physical device, and you just have an abstract level of description of the physical device. But there isn't a dividing line between mental and physical. It's a level of description of the same, of that physical device.
So that would mean that the duality of things, like, so that would be saying that there is no duality here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah. It's a level of description of a subset of the physical universe.
Can you pass the mic to Ishan?
Yeah. So coming back to your computational theory, my basic question is, mind could be said as the best proof of a semantic, or a hint of a semantic, the best hint that we know of a semantic.
Yes.
Other than that, everything is syntactic in nature. So what you're saying is that the entire physical realm is syntactic in nature.
Yes.
Which would be a very big claim for us. I mean, the dynamic cannot be explained by just syntax. Syntax, can it be? So how do you account for that hidden semantic if it's not there in the mind, which is the best proof of a semantic as of now?
Right. Yeah. I think that's an interesting question. I think it's one of the intuitive forces which drives people to accept representational theory of mind, because if there is semantics, it should be, the locus should be minds, right? So that's, I think that's a potential motivation for not accepting, say, strong AI and going for something weaker, so that you might say you can use formal methods to simulate the various phenomena, to formalize them, but that doesn't mean that those phenomena are in fact non-semantical. So, for example, if we, in the history of this kind of enterprise, from logical formalization of, say, arithmetic in the 19th century by Frege and Peano and those people, you have this intuitive understanding, what's arithmetic, what's addition, what's multiplication. Well, that's sort of semantical. We don't really know how it works, but then you have this feeling for the intended model, and then you formalize it, say, with the Peano axioms for, recursive axioms for addition and multiplication, then you have a syntactic handle on your intended model. And so you can say, well, that's what you can do with computation. There really is semantics in the human mind, and we're just trying to formalize it. So that's weak AI, right? So that's, that might be a live possibility.
So basically what we're saying is there is a certain semantic. We just don't know if the mind is a part of that semantic. Is that where...
Well, I'd say one could, we have an intuition that we understand, say, number theory, and we have this, that we try to formalize it in logic, and we have this understanding of it. But that could just be, so there's different ways you could analyze that. But if you're a hardcore syntax physicalist, you would just say, well, all that is you got some kind of brain process, maybe a syntactical one, which is encoding various things. You have a subjective intuition or somehow access to that via internal processing, and you then try to formalize it with syntax, but it's still all syntax. It's just syntax in your head, and it feels to you like it's semantics, but maybe deep down inside it's really just syntax that you're not consciously aware of. Because it is elusive, semantics. I mean, the feeling of understanding in one's own first-person world it's an elusive, mysterious kind of thing, and perhaps it's just based on syntax at a deeper level that we're not directly aware of.
Rajan, there, please, yeah.
Sir, so I won't say that I have knowledge of Veda or something, but I do know one thing, that in religion, especially in religion that I have known, one of the things that is used to give the justification of a super consciousness or consciousness or jeev within us is the fact of death. That if you assume your body to be hardware and your mind and your hormones etc. to be software, then why can't you revive a patient of heart attack after he's dead? Because all of it is still there. So if so that's what they use, because the jeev or the consciousness has left the body. You cannot revive a dead body even if every single cell of it is in murky condition. So how would computational theory answer that? Because in computational theory the analogy is with a machine. So in a machine, let's say there's a hardware and there's program. The program is basically electrons and whatnot chemicals stored in a particular way so that they encode some binary data. But they don't work without electricity. So how would computational theory, what would you say?
Before Paul responds to that, just one slight correction. There have been people who've been brought back to life after they've been declared dead. In fact, if you had a paramedic on hand armed with electronic paddles, they could paddle your heart back into functioning again. And as long as your brain was not dead for more than, let's say, a fraction of a second, you would function normally. I mean, you would still need cardiac drugs and surgery and so on and so forth, but you would be alive. Now, there is a problem when the brain dies for more than a minute, because then they could bring you back, and this happened to a colleague of mine who was teaching at East Florida State, and he was a wonderful guy, and he had a heart attack, and the paramedics came and they paddled him back. He died again. They paddled him back once more. They should have given up. And then he was resurrected medically, and he died again. This happened 3 times, but in the process his brain lost so much juice that when he came back, Bob was about 10 years old mentally. I mean, one of the most brilliant administrators at that university was reduced to a 10-year-old, and I and some other colleagues would visit him in this long-term healthcare facility in Central Florida. But the point is that you can bring the dead back to life, so to speak. Interest in that dates back to the 19th century. In fact, Mary Shelley would not have written Frankenstein if it were not for those galvanic experiments that were conducted. It was a form of entertainment, and there was no TV and no internet, for people to go there to this fair or exhibition where a corpse would be laid out and an electric current administered in just the right way, and bingo, the corpse would sit up and start twitching and even start making some noises. And of course everyone would scream and be duly terrified or amused or whatever else. But yeah. So the interest in reviving the dead is an old preoccupation of Victorian science. And it's not left us yet. Even the focus on cloning and various bioengineering approaches to longevity, stem cell research and all of that, really a way of staving off death and ensuring at least partial immortality. So the Jiva theory, much as it appeals to our conditioning, some of us who were raised Hindu, does not mean anything at all scientifically. You can bring people back.
Pull the Jiva back when it happens.
Well, that's a circular argument. Well, now I know whether the Jiva was out, but of course it must have been brought back in, or the grace of somebody or the other put it back in. Yeah. Well, whatever it is, I mean, I see your point, but yeah. But Paul?
What's interesting, but I think part of it is also a question not of computational theory of mind, but just simple biology. Is there a life force that's special above the molecular biological machinery? And so if you think, that's more of a question for biology in many ways, just about life. Is there a life force? Is there an individual life force? When it comes to computational theory of mind, then you could just say, well, the hardware is defective, so you bash this computer, it's not going to run Windows 10 anymore. But some people take your view and then say, well, if it is computational theory of mind and the hardware goes bad, just store it all on a hard drive, your program, and then later on you could be resurrected or incarnated in a different physical realization. So it's an interesting issue.
Ojasvi had a question. Rajan, second row. Middle.
So when we take a course on theory of computation or analysis and design of algorithms, we see this classic proof that there's only so much that a Turing machine can do. the number of integers is L of naught and the number of real numbers is 2 to the L of naught. So, poetically speaking, it's like all that a computer can do is, is the number of stars, and the irrationality is the darkness behind it. So, in the past 60 years, my question is that in the past 60 years, has there been any advancement in a better calculus which can make CTM more operationally precise?
Is there any way you can make CTM more operationally precise?
I think that's partly it's a very interesting cardinality problem that, say, computing functions, Turing machines can compute all computable functions, but there are provably functions which aren't computable, and you can prove that. Like the halting function. So, the halting problem is a classic case that Turing came up with, that you can't an arbitrary algorithm. If you take an arbitrary algorithm with an arbitrary input, there's no algorithm which will tell you whether or not it will halt at finite time. So you can't compute the halting function. And there's just normal functions from positive integers to positive integers. There are more of them than there are Turing machines. Because they're only first level infinity numbers of Turing machines. There's more. It's more functions from positive integers. So that's just a cardinality problem which can never be overcome, because there's only so many Turing machines, because they're just syntactical strings that are finitely long. So they're only omega many of them. First level L0. So yeah, there's too many functions. So it's just a cardinality problem in some sense. And so if you'd have to do something completely different. So people have this hypercomputation. Various people advocate forms of hypercomputation, but then basically you're taking off some of the finitary limits that we've got. So if you take away finitary limits, then there's that Hogarth-Malmuth general relativity, where if you have a Turing machine running and you go into some closed loop, and you can get the answer to the halting problem sent back to you with some strange, let it run for infinity, but then you still get the answer, and you're part of the universe. You have to do extreme scenarios like that so far.
Any other questions? Yeah, Roy, can we reach him? Yes, thank you, Rajan.
Dr. Schweizer, your presentation said that basically in CTM, only the vehicle matters and not the message. I had a question that most of the AI today is centered around learning what the user wants. For example, if I'm using Siri or Google now, then the main selling point of that technology is that it can learn what I want. It can adapt to it. But if only the syntax matters, then would it be able to do that? Or wouldn't that, if it were able to do that, wouldn't that process be very long and arduous? I mean, in the time it would learn what I want, I could have bought a new phone.
Yeah, right. So that's interesting. But when it comes down to the end, it's just algorithms, right? How do those programs work? Well, clever people try to make algorithms which try to analyze the intentions of the human users. So you're quite right that that's how it's couched. That it's to try to understand the intentions of human beings, and but that's still done algorithmically. So if you look at the process by which that takes place, it's pure syntax. If you say, well, what's going on in the brain of the human user that's trying to be accessed by these, or anticipated by these algorithms? Well, we in our normal speech we say it's their needs and their wants and desires and intentional states. But again, that's sort of begging the question: what's really going on? Well, maybe just syntax inside of them. And it's convenient for us as folk psychology and our sociolinguistic upbringing to use. We use natural language to describe that as saying they want this, they believe that. But that's folk psychology, macroscopic, external view of what's going on in the behavioral arena. But if you say what's actually going on inside their heads, it's not clear that it must reflect that kind of natural language, folk psychology kind of analysis. It could just be syntax and brain chemistry, and the physical world is just some form of syntax in some sense. So the question isn't settled by that appeal to that kind of folk psychological analysis, I think.
Any other questions? Yes, there is an. Okay. And we'll get to you later because you've already asked one question. Yeah, we have a question here. Speak clearly so our audiences on YouTube can hear you.
Good evening, sir. I would like to think about, let's talk about Occam's razor. It's perfectly understandable that CTM falls into the category of Occam's razor because the least amount of syntax or instructions are required for the process to work. But what about the representational theory of mind? Does it fall into that category?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the
Yeah, could you repeat that, Arnav?
Yeah. It is perfectly understandable that CTM falls under the category of Occam's razor because the least amount of syntax or instructions are required for the process to work. But does the RTM fall into the category of Occam's razor?
So Occam's razor is to shave off unnecessary ontological commitments in your theories and just go with what's absolutely necessary. So in that respect, if you don't need the representational content to actually explain the operation of what's going on, then Occam's razor says, amputate. so is that what you're asking? I'm sorry, I'm still not sure I actually got to the heart of your question.
See, in computational theory, only the syntax is required, the content does not matter. But in representational theory, as you said, the visions, the visuals, all is required. So you were talking about CRTM, which falls into the category of Occam's razor, as you said.
Yes,
So
yes. Get rid of the R, yes.
Yeah. So, why do you get rid of the R? Why did you get rid of the R in Occam's razor?
Because the content isn't doing any work. It's just as in that Turing machine at the very beginning that we saw the instructions, we saw the computation. You could interpret it. You could give it a semantics and saying it is actually computing addition on the positive integers. You could say that, but it doesn't actually change the computation. So you could say it's doing something else as well. You could make up other alternative interpretations for what that syntax means, but the meaning won't actually affect the processing. The algorithm executes according to rules and not according to what the rules are supposed to mean. So that's in that sense, that's what I meant, that you can then just take that semantics away because they don't do any work.
They don't matter.
Sorry.
Next. Yes. Lots of exercise for you, Rajan. Thank you very much. Our AV person who's been working over and beyond the call of duty here, and with a good humored smile.
Sir, one more thing I'd like to ask you is, how would the computational theory of mind explain the fact that human mind is able to abstract many concepts? Like, for example, especially in theory, in mathematics, and physics, and many other places, the human mind is able to abstract things and moreover understand what other humans have already abstracted upon. And furthermore, one more thing, that if you believe the computational theory of mind, everything has to be pre-programmed into a person. So if you assume that a child knows nothing, so according to computational theory of mind, most of what he can do should be under the ability of what his parents or what his initial surroundings should have. But we have many cases where the parents are not as much able or not as much intelligent or not have as much high IQ as the child has, and they are able to work out many things which their parents never even knew. Now, if a human mind is programmed, then he should know what to do if he has to do something. So, for example, if a child knows that something is sweet, and he has been told if it is sweet. So, if from childhood he is told that salt is sweet, he would continue on to say that salt is sweet. So, I have two questions. One is that how to explain the abstraction by computational theory, and second is.
Do you want to address it?
No, go for it.
Yes, well, I will preface my answer by repeating what I have said previously, that I'm not necessarily an advocate of computational theory of mind being able to solve all problems and explain all phenomena. So it's possible that these things will prove intractable at times, these phenomena, abstraction and creativity and things like that, but I don't know, so that's an open question. But in principle, I don't see a reason why it shouldn't be able to. So, because there's many different kinds of programs. There's certainly learning algorithms. I mean, machine learning is really, really big right now, right? So It's not necessarily the case that you have to be programmed with everything from the beginning. Programs can acquire, can learn.
Even if your machine learning is strong, I'm saying that if you're not provided with it, then how will you learn? Because I'm talking about parents who don't know about something their child knows about.
Right.
That's what I'm saying, that if he hasn't had access to that kind of. So I understand that when you're studying maths, first you are equipped with the basic things, and then you are brought up to theory. But if a child isn't exposed to something, then also children are able to extract are smarter than this. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so I'd say that's a problem for psychology of learning and cognitive abilities in general, independently of computational paradigm. But it seems like either you have to get that via the inputs, so the child has different inputs than the parents did, and also has different software installed genetically. So maybe the genes combine in such a way that they have a very good internal software that they're born with, and then they learn many more things when they're growing up, and that explains the diversity between generations. So, I mean, it's an interesting problem, but it doesn't seem like it necessarily is insoluble or tractable to a computational approach.
Yeah. Ishan?
So you very briefly spoke about, if there is a certain AI that will be constructed and that is able to replicate the mind, it will be constructed in a very different way. Like, the construction would be different from how we do it. For example, the calculator is doing the same computation that we are. So, I just want, it's not a question, if you can just highlight how they would look like in computational theory and representational theory. Because in representational theory, what you're saying is an AI will be constructed which will be able to correlate to a representation, a higher realm of some sort.
Higher realm.
Not a different realm, not a physical realm. It's correlating to a representational realm.
I don't know that that's what the representational theory of mind
No,
talks
I
about
guess
at
that's
all.
what. A representation. There is a certain representation that's behind the machine itself. So, am I wrong in this?
The beginning of your question, I think you're asking, would you could have a potentially, like a Turing test kind of scenario, that you could potentially have, say, a robot. I don't know if you've heard of Harlan's total Turing test, but that behaves and acts just like a human being, is indistinguishable, but is actually run by an artificial program, is an artifact. And then you might say, well, that's a successful case of artificial intelligence, right? Here's this robot.
But that's in a computational theory sense. In a representational theory sense, wouldn't it be different?
Yeah, so you could say even in the computational sense it might be very different. So you could say all this thing has to do, this robot, to pass the test, the total Turing test, and be deemed to be intelligent on a par with the human, is that they are behaviorally indistinguishable from a human. And that's all AI has to do. So then you can say, well, its program might be extremely different than a human being. It might not. Our brain might be running a completely different kind of computational architecture than the robot. So in that respect, there could be a huge divergence between the artifact and a human. But if the artifact can successfully perform as a human, then some people say that's enough. So there could be a divergence of the internal processing as long as the behavioral outputs and inputs profiles were indistinguishable. That would be success. Because that's sometimes called, the different algorithms can produce the same input-output profiles, and they just go about it in very, very different ways. So the robot might do it one way, a human might do it another. That's still okay for computational theory of mind.
But which brings me to an issue I have with machine learning and with CTM in general, especially strong CTM, like strong AI. And that is that this robot that is programmed, it's got enough algorithms there to spin anyone's head, and it is able to simulate most of the functions of the human being, where it fools us into thinking it's passed the Turing test. But how do we know that it has? Is its laughter spontaneous? There are robots that can laugh. There are fuzzy bots that can tell you I love you. There are fuzzy, There are bots that can take care of the elderly, there are bots that sing to the young and so on and so forth. But how genuine are they? I mean, to use Philip K. Dick's ironic title, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Do they have the capacity to dream, to laugh, to wonder, to construct novels out of the blue, to get up in the middle of a sentence or a class or a career and do something completely different? That capacity for spontaneity verging on self-sabotage that humans have. I mean, I think an expanded version of the Turing test needs to include all of these as sample tests that the robot would have to pass successfully before we deemed it to have intelligence. What do you think?
Yes,
Now that to my mind is a strong objection to strong CTM and strong AI. Not necessarily to weak AI and weak CTM. So CTM is a theory of the syntactical structures of the mind and the brain, or even the brain as hardware and the mind as software, as the programs that are inserted there by parents, media, Wolfpack, etc., etc. I'm quite with that. But strong CTM and strong AI, I think, can be subjected to an expanded Turing test, as I call it.
Yeah, that's.
What say you?
I think that's potentially a problem with the behavioristic standards of the Turing test as well, because that's what motivated Turing, because he wanted to have objective, empirically accessible evidence, so behavior. So the things which you're talking about, is it really genuine when it's singing to the child? That's, if it's not manifestable in terms of observable behavior,
Right.
then it's empirically extremely difficult to evaluate, or to measure, or to access.
Because a real caregiver, might sing to the child, but also in a mood of sheer frustration and annoyance, abuse the child or walk out, or, primal scream silently while taking care of the child. That's the nth time I've wiped up your feces today, or whatever else. So there's that whole sense in which there's a spontaneity in the human caregiver, which the bot caregiver radically lacks. If the bot caregiver switches behaviors that abruptly and, quote, unpredictably, we would probably call it a malfunctioning robot. But we wouldn't call a human being capable of spontaneous frame switches of that nature a malfunctioning human being necessarily. Yeah.
So
Your take on that?
yeah, so that becomes, it's a very, it's obviously an extremely subtle problem trying to elucidate the criteria by which we judge something to be genuinely mental, and particularly if you want it to be empirically confirmable and testable. So that's one thing why one motivation for the Turing test, because in many cases the bottom line is, well, behavior is crucial, and the internal forces that we can't observe become much more elusive. So yeah, maybe consciousness has to enter the picture here.
After all, yeah.
So does RTM,
And consciousness in the non-Cartesian sense, in the Sankhya Vedanta sense. Okay.
does RTM eliminate AI? I mean, in general.
Does RTM eliminate AI, is the question.
I would think not. I think it just eliminates some aversion that's committed to standard Cartesian, Brentano, Fogorian, Searlean intentionality and semantics. So I think in terms of operational success, it should be fine. if it can succeed, then that won't make any difference. That won't hinder its success. I mean, because if you think semantics is essential, if the semantics isn't actually syntactically encoded and physically implemented, what work can it do? That's the basic problem as I see it. You may think semantics is crucial, but if you don't have it syntactically encoded and you don't have it physically implemented, it will have no physical efficacy, whatever.
But the syntactical coding is capable of spontaneous punctuation with the human being. And I guess what I'm calling the expanded Turing test challenges the robot to fulfill that condition, which thus far most robots would fail, or all robots would fail manifestly. Yeah.
fail on even easier things than that.
Which doesn't mean that the bot cannot function a wide, and machine learning has no uses, obviously it does. Certainly if one is totally lonely and abandoned and so on and so forth, to have a fuzzy bot as caregiver might be, something cute. Keeping you from terminal depression and Alzheimer's and all of that, just because you're entertained and you feel loved all day. But there is a sneaking suspicion, if you have any mind left in you as a senior, very senior citizen, that this is fake, that the robot doesn't really love me. Yeah, he or she is just a very clever toy produced by a Japanese manufacturer. Yeah, Rajan, where are you when we need you? Dr. Chatterjee.
Okay, I can, since I'm at the back, I can perhaps speak without the...
But I think you'd be clearer with the mic, particularly because we're on TV.
Okay, what I was going to suggest is that the reason that the human being thinks like that is because it's a computational machine which can't think certain things. So your objection that, I see something lacking in the robot is a problem with the computational machine inside you.
So anyone who questions these CTM is a malfunctioning computational process.
Which it has to be, because there is no reason to suppose
Touché, Sabresh.
computational machine is a perfect computational machine.
Yeah.
It's just some imperfect computational machine.
Okay. Yeah.
Sir, also what I think is...
Could you speak up so our viewers on YouTube can hear your question better?
Sir, also what I think is that objecting in the way that robots created, fuzzy robots like you mentioned, created for loving their users, failing the behavioral Turing test is actually based on a wrong belief, because these robots are created to imitate what a human would do. So it is actually up to what you are trying to create. If you will never program a need into the robot. But human beings have needs. They have needs that I need to be happy, that I need to be secure, that I need to be out of danger. But a robot isn't programmed with those needs. All it ever is programmed is by imitating a human's needs. So actually it isn't carrying out any needs of its own. And that's perhaps why it can't ever fully reach the limit of human behavior, because human behavior is based on some certain foundational emotions, love, anger, fear, etc. But you don't program them into the robots. So if, for example, you say to the robot, program something that it has to think for its own benefit first, then perhaps it will then perhaps the caregiver would not stay as long with the baby, because it has its own life. It has to go to his life as well. That's why some of the babysitters try to frown, because they have their own lives also, and in their mind they have a need that I need to be happy, and I will be happy if I go back to my life and not here. So if you program into a robot that it needs to look for itself, look after itself also, then perhaps it will be able to replicate that human behavior, that spontaneity, that frustration, that why am I doing this?
Well, actually, Isaac Asimov's ethical rules for robots suggests that the robot needs to take care of itself, but also take care of other robots and human beings, and not harm any human being unnecessarily. So, if you take these ethical codes, the robot could not be programmed to behave that way. To just abandon an elderly patient, let's say, or a child, and say, well, I've got to take care of my needs. Time I went and watched a movie. I think a human could say that, but not a robot.
So that's what I'm saying.
I was going to suggest that, there's a deeper problem over here. You see, if we are all computational machines, then the computational machines that we can produce are going to be less able computational machines than we are. That doesn't negate the idea that we are computational machines.
But we are perhaps higher order.
We are higher order
Computational
computational
machines.
machines than any computational machine that we can compute for.
Yeah,
All right?
for.
Maybe there are, to go back to one of your theories, is that we are some simulation in yet another computational machine.
Yeah,
I remember
that's
that happening in that point coming up in one of our lunch
discussions.
philosophy.
Yes, we were discussing Hillary Putnam and the brain in a vat. So in fact, the mad computer scientist could have designed the syntax of my biocomputer and yours, and could have designed it in a much more superior way than computations that we design in our computer labs.
Yeah,
Right.
That's part of the perceived threat of the singularity when the art, the human-created artifacts actually then supersede humans and can perform better in many, many ways than humans. So it could be a time.
Maybe not. And as I said in my version of the expanded Turing
It
test,
can't be ruled out, though.
it can't be ruled out, but you could say that precisely because I am a superior computational machine, I am then capable. Huh?
So far.
So far, I am capable of judging the failures and follies of the lesser robotic creations produced by human beings and say, well, that's a malfunctioning robot. That robot isn't spontaneous. That robot didn't pass the Turing test, and so on. Yeah.
But an interesting thing with brains in the vat is also Chalmers' matrix as metaphysics. That's quite an interesting.
Yeah, Chalmers' matrix, which we also discussed in class,
Metaphysics.
was directly influenced by Professor Putnam's brain in a vat argument, which is really a thought experiment. Putnam didn't endorse it. It is an updated version of Descartes and his evil demon. Except instead of the malicious demon in Descartes, you have the mad computer scientist, which is a much more accessible metaphor today, I think, than the evil demon. Yeah. Did you have a question? You've been looking at us with some puzzlement for the past hour. And you, Mrinal? Yes. Yes. Come on up.
Basically trying to comprehend.
Okay, so wait a minute. Listen, wait, we are on YouTube, therefore let's bring the mic in so that everyone, viewers from around the world can hear you.
I was basically trying to comprehend all the ideas that have been put forth. Not necessarily a question. I don't have a question.
You were trying to comprehend the ideas that were put forward. Could you come up with some kind of capsule summary of some of the basic ideas, Mrinal?
Basically, in the past few minutes that you said that we are basically better robots than the ones we create and judge them based on a relative scale.
Thus far, as he pointed out, yeah, thus far. That's why we can smirk complacently and say, but I passed the Turing test and that damn machine can't.
Basically, it's all about relativity. So you're judging on a scale, taking yourself as absolute and then comparing robots onto your level.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily on an absolute scale where you don't consider the fact that you also might be a programmed machine.
No, we did bring that.
So that,
Yeah, to bring that up. Yeah. So that's what
in a way,
touched a chord in you. Yeah. The idea that we too may be superior robots. And of course that has been explored by various Hillary Putnam, Philip K. Dick in his science fiction, a lot of different people. If you've seen the movie Blade Runner, that's a cinematic version of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Yeah. Did anyone else have a question? Abhishek? No? You were just grinning. Okay. Yes?
How does computation theory of mind actually comprehends with like the human beings' desire to choose? Like I'm seeing two bottles in front of me. I have the
Two robots?
two bottles in front of me.
Okay.
I
All
want
right.
to like,
I was wondering what drugs you were on, but yeah. Anyway, go on. Yeah.
I just want the right one actually.
Yeah.
How does this computation theory of mind actually comprehend with the human beings' very desire to choose between two things or so on? Like that's the beauty of mankind that they can choose. They actually have this power.
So you're talking about free will or?
Yeah, so free will.
That's a problematic topic in any case, but you can have, you could just create random branch points. So I think this would, I think I choose to pick it, but maybe some random branch point in my brain was actually causing me to do it, and I think I have free will.
So, for example,
So you can get robots to do that.
For example, like a young child, like a newborn baby, he just feels in the, like he just knows, like whenever he just gets out of his mother's lap, he just cries. That's the abstract nature of human beings. But how can this computational theory of mind, like just link to that kind of abstractness of human beings? Because like there are many such questions that human beings have too intelligent and too abstract behaviors that we couldn't even think of themselves, like even at a small stage of child.
Well, as I said before, I don't necessarily advocate the computational theory of mind as being able to explain all phenomena. So some things might be better explained in terms of chemical, biophysical mechanisms which aren't happily analyzed in formal terms. I mean, traditionally people with AI and computational theory of mind are more interested in the high-level cognitive abilities and developmental issues, and other things are less, sort of less addressed. So, belief, desire, rational action, propositional attitude states, which are all already sort of linguistic, rational, deliberative phenomena. That's what people focus on, and more basic biological things like infant behavior, that might not be in the remit ultimately.
But I think, Paul, one reason why you've been hearing this sort of mantric intone from many of us, that you are a powerful apostle of CTM, is because you plug it quite strongly in your papers. I mean, you do make a strong case for it. You argue that it is not only, that it's a sufficient theory of the mind, you don't need the representational theory or any other subjective or ghost in the machine account. I mean, you've said that quite blatantly, and you haven't actually uttered this caveat that I heard from you in person, that you are not necessarily advocating, and you see that there are problems with it, and that so far it's not been verified. But that doesn't actually come out in the 2 or 3 papers I've read by you on the subject of the computational theory of mind, CTM.
I think it's always an implicitly conditional approach I take. Basically, it's analyzing the received orthodox view. So I'm arguing that isn't a stable, coherent picture. So I say, if you accept the computational theory of mind, then you should reject the representational semantical theory. But I don't discharge the antecedent.
But sometimes the if-then,
Yes.
the hypothetical, is lost in the passion of your statements about CTM. At least they did for me. And actually, it was not till I read the Vedanta and Sankhya paper that I realized that you're certainly not a simplistic advocate of CTM.
No, not at all. I will articulate its virtues and strengths, but that isn't, I'm agnostic about whether or not it's the right approach.
Yeah.
And so my views are all expressed conditionally, that if you do accept this framework, then there's other things which come along in its wake which you shouldn't accept.
Right.
Because they're incompatible, but it is still conditional. So I'm not saying it's the correct view, but I'm saying if you do accept it, then you should abandon representational content because it's incompatible.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Comments? Yeah? Rajan? Yeah, we'll wrap it up then.
Well, it's not a question, but it's a comment. When I was listening to all this, actually this is something that I had already contemplated about before, for many, many years. You know, that how the brain functions not just because, there is something inside you, a soul or spirit per se, but it is because of some algorithms that are taking place in your mind. And some people believe that, this may not be plausible because they're not perhaps willing to reject the idea of a soul being within themselves. Well, I'd say that for each level that you can recognize, say, as we were talking about gods, that they are made to do something. They are intended to, perform a particular function. So if you can get into what instigates that function, that would be going to a lower level. And if you can recognize all that, so in a way, you keep going to lower and lower levels, and ultimately, you will tend to a position wherein you're actually a human. So if you can, keep, as I'm saying, determining what leads to another state. Say, I'm happy. So happiness itself is a derivative of certain, events that are taking place inside you. So it's about identification and implementing. So I believe that everything can be explained by the computation.
You believe everything can be so explained? So you don't think there is a disembodied soul or spirit that has to live within us that...
Well, if you think of every, behavior or stage or even every thought, so I believe that there is that thought is a derivative of something that takes place. And this
could be explained biochemically, or it could be explained in terms of syntactic processes.
Even biochemical releases can be explained by something else. It's not
by something else. What is the something else?
So that is something. Again, it is something that is to be recognized.
What's something?
A force.
A force.
Something that drives you, but I am not particularly.
So there is a shade of soul there. Just a wisp of the ghost in the machine. I caught him clanking his chains down those stairs just as you talked.
That's perhaps the difference between a human and a robot.
Is the ghost in the machine? Ghost in the machine, whereas the robot is all machine.
I can't answer that.
No, I'm not making fun of it. It's fine. The ghost in the machine is a trope or a metaphor that was invented by Professor Gilbert Ryle of Oxford many years ago in a book called The Concept of Mind. And Ryle, he uses that as a mischievous bashing point against Plato and Descartes, especially Descartes, and the representationalists and many kinds of empiricists and so forth. But what I'm hearing you say is you have some vestige of that left. That you're saying behind the computational processes, behind the lifting of my arm, behind the biochemic, there is a force.
The way I like to think of it is if the complexity inside us is infinity, then there is a possibility of making something that tends towards infinity.
What do you mean making? You're saying we could make an infinite robot?
Something that is tending towards infinity,
So then out goes the ghost in the machine. We're now just talking pure mega machine.
We possibly have that wisp of a ghost, as you were saying, but...
Wisp? Well, a ghost itself is a sort of a wisp. But yeah, a wisp of a wisp.
In maths, like we talk about, something that is approaching towards a certain value, but not exactly at that value.
Yeah.
That is perhaps, that's what came to my mind when I was, watching.
Okay. And did you get anything else from this presentation and from the various dialogues and segues we've been having over the past hour and a half?
Well, it did change a lot of my, the way I thought about the mind. And just hearing a lot of people talk about what they feel about it, it influences you.
Okay. Right.
That's perhaps.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Unfortunately, we need to bring this evening to a close. And, I would like to, like all of us, to acknowledge what a wonderful evening it's been. I think this is one of the best Institute seminars I've attended, if I say so myself. But without further ado, I'd like to ask, Sukesh, would you do the honors? Please come up. It's a small token of our appreciation for you, Paul. Please accept it from Triple IT. Let's give him a big round of applause. No, it doesn't have more samosas in it. It actually has cash, which is much more valuable in Modi's India. Yeah, real cash. You don't have to stand at that ATM tonight and curse the stars.
Should I open it?
You might be mugged on the way out. I suggest you kind of fold it in somewhere, put it in that duffel bag where no one else will get at it. And now we're on YouTube, so there are plenty of muggers out there who are smacking their lips. From here to Barakamba Road, you're lucky you're not traveling by metro. They'd surely get you now. They've been watching us on their mobile phones. All right, thank you very much. And to all our students, friends, research students, faculty members, and administrators, I caught a brief glimpse of Professor Jalote, our director. A very warm, heartfelt thank you, especially to Eva and Paul for coming all the way from Scotland just to be with us. Namaste to you too. And to all our viewers on YouTube and friends on Facebook and other social media, a very good evening to you. I hope you enjoyed this show brought to you live from Triple IT Delhi. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.